Nedarim Daf Lamed Gimel begins the fourth parak of the Masechta at the end of the previous daf. This parak discusses somebody who makes an Isser Hana on someone else. What types of Hana are Aser? We'll have three Mishnayos on the daf. First one comparing an Isser Hana to an Isser Achila. What's included in Isser Hana and Isser Achila? The Gemara will get into what happens if it's such a small Hana that people usually just wave it off. Second Mishnah will discuss what happens if you save by not having to pay rent. Does that count as a hana? And the third will discuss if you aren't helping the person, you're just blocking him from having to pay something. Does that count as a hana? And Umar will go through all of those. So let's begin. First Mishnah compares somebody who makes an Isser Hana on his friend that he's not allowed to have enough from him to someone who says that he's not allowed to have food from him. So the Gemara says those two are very similar. There's a lot of things included in food that you would not necessarily naturally think. The differences between the two are passage through one's land. If you only asked food, you're allowed to walk through his land. However, if you ask to know, you're not even allowed to walk through his land. And borrowing kalim, objects that aren't any way connected to food preparation, those would be considered non-food related. Those would only be usher to somebody who is usher to have hana and not to somebody who's usher to have food. As we shall see, things which lead to food are usher. Even if you only ushered food, anything which is part of the creation of food is usher. And the Mishnah brings examples of that. If you ushered hana for somebody, if you ushered food for somebody, you're not allowed to lend him your sifter, your sieve, your grinder, or your oven. However, you are allowed to lend him your shirt, your ring, your talus, and your nose rings. Those are all things which are not involved in food. You're allowed to lend those. Now, the Gemara is going to say all those things you're allowed to lend is only if you don't usually rent them out. You just lend them for free. The Gemara also says that if you're going to let the guy shortcut through your land, obviously that's only allowed if it's an Isser Achila, not for an Isser Hana. So you see that even a negligible hana, such as allowing somebody to shortcut or allowing somebody to borrow something, even if you never usually charge rent for it, these things are usher on somebody that you usher hana. So the Gemara wants to know who's the opinion that says that if somebody's usher to get hana, he's not even allowed to get something that people usually just ignore the value, they wave it away. So the Gemara says this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, which we have seen a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanon. What is the halacha if somebody's asked to have enough from you? Are you allowed to just say to him that he can keep the change, or just throw in a little bit of extra fruit that you're selling to round it off? These things that people usually just ignore and they're just meichel, you're allowed to have that. So Rabbi Eliezer says no. So that's the same opinion here, that he's saying even these things which people don't usually charge for, they don't usually care about, are usher to someone who is not allowed to have hana from you. All right, now let's go to the Gemara. We've already quoted part of the Gemara, but let's go to the beginning of the Gemara here. So the Gemara wants to know, why is it usher to lend something which is a kli that's involved in food preparation if all you usher from the guy is food? Now, the Rishonim explain, we understand if you ushered food, that includes you can't lend a pot or a knife, something that's directly involved in food. But here we're talking about something that's a few steps along the way, grinding the flour or the oven to bake the bread. So why should that be considered food that we usher somebody who is only usher to get food? So the answer is that Rishon ben Lakish says that he didn't actually say food is usher on you, he said the hana of food. So when it says hana of food, hana food doesn't mean the kalim you use to make food. Hana food means you can't do other things with the food besides eating it. For example, we know that crushed, ground, chewed up wheat kernels are good for stopping blood flow. So you can't take somebody else's wheat kernels, crush them up, and put it on a wound. So, but what does it have to do with this? So the Gemara therefore changes slightly. Rava says it's not that he said that food is usher, he said that any hana which is involved in food production, that is what is usher for you to get from me. So therefore, that includes even using the guy's sieve, sifter, grinder, or oven. Now the Gemara says, what about a few steps further removed? Rav Papa asks, what about lending him a sack to bring fruits, or the donkey to carry the fruits, or even a basket to carry the fruit? So he says that's also usher. That's also called a hana that brings towards food. Now, Rav Papa asks, though, what about lending him a horse to ride? There, you're not giving him something to bring the food to you. You're going to the food. You are enabling him to get to the food. Is that considered to be bringing food to him? Is that considered to be a hana of food, or just you're allowing him to get to it, so that doesn't count. Now, the Gemara also says, what about giving him a ring or something fancy that he could wear that will make him look chashav so people want to give him a better seat at the party so that he could get more food? Also, you're bringing him to the food as opposed to the food to him. And the third thing in this list is allowing him to shortcut across your land. Would you allow him to do that? Is that also considered to be bringing him food? Again, you're just making it easier for him to get to the food instead of the other way around. So the Gemara wants to bring a proof. The Mishnah said an example of something that you're allowed to do for somebody who has an Isser food, and not Isser Hana, is to lend him a talis or jewelry. So what is this talis and jewelry for? If it's just random things that have nothing to do with food, so what's a chiddush? It must be that he's borrowing it in order to be able to look more chashav so that people will give him more food, and that's the chiddush that's also. So you see that even that is also considered to be Hanas food. Versus no, not necessarily. It could be that there is no chiddush really. We're only talking about lending it to him not for any food-related intent. The reason that it's mentioned here is because we gave examples of things which you are not allowed to do if you ask for food. So we wanted to give examples of the contrast to that, things which you are allowed to do if you only ask for food that are included in the Isser Hana, but not in the Isser of food. Okay, now we get to our next Mishnah. The next Mishnah says that here are examples, as we said earlier, of things which aren't involved in food, that you're allowed to lend, as we said earlier, is only if you would never rent it. And the Gemara says, as we said earlier, that this is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, who says you cannot even give things which is just a profit, which you would just be moichel and you don't even charge for. Okay, now we get to the third Mishnah, and that discusses where you're not actually giving him any benefit, you're just blocking him from loss. So here we have a few examples. Somebody who asks us enough from his friend. So we say you're allowed to pay his machatzis hasheka, which everybody needs to give to the Beis Hamikdash for their share of korbanos. You're also allowed to pay a loan that he borrowed from somebody. You're allowed to pay that off. And if he lost an object, you're allowed to return the object to him. All these things, you're not giving him a benefit. You're just preventing a loss, the loss of the object, the loss of the shekel, and the loss of the money that he has to pay to the person who's coming to collect from him. Now, in all these cases, if the custom is that that person is supposed to pay the one who does the service for him, then he needs to lose the money. You can't just be meichel to him, because then he's getting hana from you if you're meichel the payment that he gives you. So therefore he has to pay it, but if you don't want to take it, then that payment will go to hektish. You don't have to accept it for yourself. So the Gemara explains why are all these things okay, because you're not really giving him hana, you're just blocking a lion. If there's a lion that's going to attack his possessions and you stop the lion, again, you didn't do anything, his possessions remain the same as they were before. He could have had a loss, you prevented the loss. He didn't actually get anything, he just stopped losing. That doesn't count as an actual hana. So the Gemara says, whose opinion is that? So the Gemara has two shitas as to whose opinion it is. Rav Hoshia says this is the opinion of Hanan in a machlokes about what happens if somebody pays he pays someone else's obligations to provide food for the guy's wife. So if somebody went to Medina Sam and his wife wants to collect food, he's not there, and he says to someone else, she says to someone else, I would like to borrow money from you to pay for the food. He says, okay, I'm going to give you the money to pay for the food that your husband owes me, and when he gets back, he'll pay me for it. So there, the husband is not going to be obligated to pay for that, and the guy who laid out food for that lost. And the reason is because he didn't give him something that he needed to give. He gave something that he had no obligation for. So Hanan says, again, the guy lost his money by giving it to the wife because the husband could say, I didn't ask you to pay it, and therefore I'm not paying it back for you. And the Bnei Kohanim HaGedolim disagree, and they say, no, the guy should swear how much he paid, and then he has a right to collect it from the husband. Now, Rabbi Doisa ben Horkenes agrees with them, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai agreed with Hanan. So here in this case, Hanan is holding that by him paying off the loss, he doesn't get to collect anything. That would be the opinion in our mission that says you don't get to collect anything. That's how the Amar of Hoshia wants to explain the Mishnah. Rava says, no, even the Bnei Kohanim HaGedolim could agree here. We're talking about a situation where the guy did not have to pay the money that he owed. How would that be? Why would he not have to pay it? So in the case where he borrowed money from someone he may not have to pay back, it could be that it's referring to a case where the deal that they made was that he's going to borrow the money, and the other person is never allowed to force him to pay. He cannot say he has to pay by a certain date, even though he has to pay. There is no due date. Practically, therefore, he never has to pay, because he could always say, I'm not paying you now, I'll pay you later. He may want to pay to ease his conscience, and this person saves him from his conscience problem, but he can never actually force him, and therefore he never actually saves him from a loss. Now, the case of the shekel, that would have to be where he sent the machzis a shekel and it got stolen and lost on the way to the Beis Hamikdash. In a case like that, it's not his responsibility. He doesn't have to replace it. If this guy went and said, I'm going to replace it for you, that was not an obligation that he had any longer because he had sent it. And that would be the case where he does not need, where he didn't get actual hana, even according to the Bnei HaKanim Hagadolim. Now, why did Rav Aishia not want to say like Rava? Why did Rava not want to say like Rav Aishia? So Rava didn't want to say like Rav Aishia because he didn't want to say it's just Hanan. He wanted to make this price fit according to all opinions. Why did Rav Aishia not want to say like Rava? He did not agree that it could be talking about a case where he made an agreement that he doesn't have to pay by any given date because he says we should make a gzera of that case or to other cases. If you're not allowed to do it in that case, we should not. If you're allowed to get hana in that case, we should still ask her because you may confuse it and end up getting hana in a case where there's a normal loan. All right, now the Gemara has a shaila. The Gemara has a machlokes between Rav Ami and Rav Asi. We discussed paying off a loan and returning a lost object to the situation where the finder is not allowed to give hana to the loser. He's allowed to return the loser's lost object, even though that loser is not supposed to get hana from him, because he's not actually giving him any hana. Now the Gemara wants to know, what about the other way around? What if the finder is not supposed to get any hana? Is he allowed to return the lost object of the person from whom he's not supposed to get any hana? What would be the problem? So Gemara says the concept of pruta derav yosef, that as long as you're involved in taking care of a lost object that you found, you're involved in a mitzvah, and therefore if somebody comes to the door to collect the tzedakah, you don't have to give him, because you're involved in a mitzvah, you're patur from doing a different mitzvah. That's a concept called pruta derav yosef. It's a machlokes Rabba and Rav Yosef and Masechas Bava Metzia, whether that exists. According to Rav Yosef, it does. So this hana that I'll say from having to give, perhaps that's a benefit which he's getting from the person that he is not allowed to get hana from, who's the one he's going to return the lost object to. So is that considered to be a real hana or not? So that's a machlokes between Rav Ami and Rav Asi. One says he's allowed to do that. That's not common, and therefore it doesn't count as a real hana. And the other says he's not allowed to because that is a real hana. Another one's going to try to bring proofs to that topic on the next daf.